Before you progress beyond the training hill, you must first be adept at making smooth landing flares and touchdowns. Once you leave the training hill to begin making high flights, you will need a new set of skills and new levels of knowledge and judgment. Perhaps the most important of the new skills you will need for high flights is the ability to set up an approach to your desired landing area. The most important aspect of landing is to always keep a safe landing area within your gliding range while you are flying. In order to make consistent landing patterns, you must first learn to interpret your glide angle. If you hold a consistent speed and direction in a constant air mass, you will fly a constant descent angle to the point on the ground that you will eventually intercept. All points closer than this intercept point will continue to drop steeper beneath you as you approach, and all points further away will continue to decrease in angle and rise in your field of view as you descend short of them. If you want to learn to make consistent spot landings, you must learn to recognize this point of constant declination and be able to regulate your glide so the point of intercept coincides with your desired aim point. The classic aircraft landing pattern is a very good approach to use in a paraglider because it starts upwind of the landing area. This helps to ensure that you will not be caught too far downwind, unable to penetrate through the headwind to reach your target. One of the biggest limitations a paraglider has is its poor ability to move forward against a headwind. Anytime you are downwind of the landing area, you run the risk of not being able to reach it if the wind speed picks up to the point where it equals your maximum forward flying speed. The aircraft approach starts at an initial point. This point is upwind and to one side of your landing target, and should be at an altitude of about 400 feet. Its specific location is chosen so as to allow you to start from that point and proceed with all of the remaining steps in any conditions of wind, lift, and sink. The altitude of the initial point is a function of its distance from your final landing target. It should lie at a constant angle of descent or declination to the target. There may be times when you cannot get to the initial point at the planned altitude. In this situation, you can still use the aircraft approach. However, you will enter the approach pattern part of the way along the normal flight path. Before entering the traffic pattern, you must first locate all other traffic that might be a factor during your approach. You want to avoid making a simultaneous approach to the same target. Locate any wind streamers and determine the direction and strength of the wind. You'll want to check them again as you proceed with your approach because wind speed and direction may change. The point on the ground directly below our initial point is located upwind and to one side of our intended target, at 45 degrees off the wind direction line. The distance of this point from the target is about 400 to 500 yards, which puts the target at about a 20-degree glide slope. We arrive at this point at 400 feet and begin our pattern by flying directly toward the target. This is the pattern entry leg, sometimes referred to by pilots as the 45. Since our glide ratio is much higher than our relative elevation angle to the target, we will find the target moving below our glide slope, and we will soon have the target about 30 degrees below us. At this point, we make a turn to fly directly downwind with the target to our side. This is our downwind leg. As we pass by the target, we monitor our altitude, the angle back towards the target in the horizontal plane, and the declination angle to the target. When we are about 30 degrees downwind of the target in the horizontal plane, and we have descended so the target is again about 30 degrees below us, we make a 90-degree turn to our base leg. We are now flying directly across the wind direction and are generally downwind of the target. As we approach the point that is directly downwind of the target, we will descend further until the target is now about a 5-to-1 glide or 12-degree angle below us. At this point, we turn again, so as to intercept a flight path that is directly into the wind and directly towards the target. If we choose the proper pattern and fly the pattern correctly, the target is now exactly upwind of us and exactly on our descending glide slope. We fly straight to the target, execute our landing flare, and plant both feet square on the bullseye. A spot landing is a complex process that relies on your ability to judge angles and execute maneuvers with a degree of precision. However, it will not work exactly as stated in most conditions. The ability to judge angles and to anticipate where you will land, and the ability to fly a chosen ground track and execute turns at specific points with precision are fundamental to your skills as a pilot. And finally, your ability to make the necessary adjustments to the standard aircraft approach that will make it work in changing conditions will depend on your acquiring the same abilities in judgment and precision flying that are needed to execute the basic pattern. Once you progress to soaring flight, you should expect to encounter random parcels of air that are rising or sinking and generally trying to complicate your landing approach. The general rule of thumb for corrections is to turn towards the target and sink, and away from the target and lift. Continue to evaluate your position from the target and make corrections to drive yourself to the proper glide path and distance from the target for the current and expected conditions. You can correct for being high by flying a longer path through the air. You may angle your base leg slightly away from the target, but ignore the temptation to extend your downwind leg. You may also extend your base leg by flying past the target and using gentle S turns. Big ears is also a useful technique for quickly losing more altitude. Remember to exit big ears above 100 feet, or else keep them engaged until the landing flare. You can make fine glide slope corrections by changing your airspeed. Use caution to not stall if slowing below minimum sink speed. As a precaution for wind gradients, do not slow significantly below best glide speed when below 50 feet. Conversely, do not use your speed bar at a low altitude in anything other than smooth conditions. You can also increase your drag and steepen your descent by standing up vertically in your harness. If you are forced to land in a small restricted landing field, you may find that flying a standard aircraft pattern will put you too far downwind of dangerous obstacles. The overhead key approach is a tight abbreviated pattern fashioned after approaches used by other low L/D aircraft such as flamed-out military fighters, lifting bodies, and winged spacecraft. The pattern uses checkpoints called keys that are windows of altitude and horizontal ground position along a descending 360-degree spiral approach. The high key and low key positions serve as a means to gauge the approach so as to ensure a consistent base key and final approach. The overhead key approach starts at the high key window on an upwind heading with a lateral offset from the target. The goal is to maintain a steep 20 to 45 degree declination angle to the target as you fly around it in a downward spiral to a close base key position. To set up for the approach, use any appropriate technique so that you are roughly overhead the landing target at 300 feet. Aim to enter high key facing into the wind at 250 feet. The high key window is laterally offset approximately 150 feet from the target, although you may decide to start even closer as you gain experience. Fly upwind and maintain a constant horizontal distance from the target by starting a gentle crosswind turn. Aim to cross the extended upwind center line of the target perpendicular to the wind. This first 90 degrees of turn should give you a good idea of the pattern winds and your penetration capability. Maintain the constant radius ground track and aim to cross the low key window directly abeam the target on a downwind heading at 150 feet altitude. The approach from high key to low key is designed to enable you to evaluate conditions and performance. From low key, you now transition to a steeper approach with a tighter radius to cross the base key position at 100 feet altitude, playing your turn as required to roll out directly downwind of the target at 50 to 75 feet. In light winds, you will need to increase your rate of descent from the low key position to avoid being high at the base key. Pulling big ears is recommended instead of extending your downwind or base legs because it allows you to turn more directly to final without excessive low altitude maneuvering. Use a combination of weight shift and differential big ears to hold the desired turn radius. At many flying sites, soaring pilots have the opportunity to top land. Like cliff launches, top landings require special skills based on knowledge and experience. You need to be able to fly a restricted landing field approach while deconflicting with other pilots and dealing with lift, sink, and rotor turbulence. At many coastal cliff sites, a standard aircraft pattern works well for flying over the top of and well behind the front rotor. At mountain sites such as this one, flying too far back exposes you to canyon sink and turbulence. Here, a combination of S-turns and big ears works well for descending through the lift band until you are low enough to descend parallel to and slightly behind the front of the hill. Notice the light rotor that exists just behind the front of the hill in these light wind touch and goes.